Thousands of people in Metro Detroit are standing up against its drug epidemic, and hundreds of them have come here to find solutions. Our first guest is Dawn Taylor. She is the producer of Chasing Hope. Dawn, your documentary documents just the wide spectrum of people that get pulled into this predator drug. And it doesn't matter if it's a cheerleader or a drug dealer. But what makes your film different than the other ones that we've seen?
Well, you kind of touched on it a little bit. It reaches everyone from the gang leader to the cheerleader. And the difference between this film and the others is that we talk about the why. Most adolescents and adults know that drugs are bad, alcohol's bad, but
Yes.
they're still doing it.
Well, here in Metro Detroit, we're almost getting fatigued from the fact we're hearing about all the deaths and the number of people that die every day and the amount of drugs being brought in. And now you're talking about what we need now is solutions.
Absolutely. We need to look at the why. I mean, we really need to look at the reasons why people are choosing to use, even when we know the repercussions.
Okay, now in addition to that, what are the warning signs? I know that's your film that you're going to be showing here tonight is going to offer the warning signs that moms and dads and loved ones can look for.
Yeah, and I think that it's really critical to note that we could talk about the physical warning signs, but the more prevalent one that I'm concerned about, that Chasing Hope is concerned about, is the social isolation. That when adolescents start sort of removing themselves from their friends, from their peers, from
Right.
their family.
Now sometimes
critical.
young kids will just be kids and they'll get little remorse and they can almost act like they're on having a drug issue, but they're just acting out as children.
Yes, but that's when we need to start having those conversations, actually before that. That's
Okay.
the perfect time.
All right, well, you're awesome for putting all this incredible work into this documentary, and these people get to see it here tonight. That's fantastic. Thank you. Again, we're talking about solutions tonight, not just about the problem. Our next guest is Dr. Christoph Dean. He's with the Michigan Association of Chiropractors. Dr. Dean, oftentimes people get a little confused. Why is the chiropractic community in the mid-Michigan area so involved in this issue? One question that often comes up from our viewers is, opioids help people manage their pain, and if you manage your pain, you can often get healthier. I mean, you guys aren't suggesting that we take away opioids, are you?
No, we're certainly not doing that. As Dawn pointed out, there are many ways to get into this problem, but one of the main ways is through legally prescribed, properly prescribed, if you want, painkillers for people that have been injured. What we want to do is point out to both the patient and the treating community that there are non-pharmaceutical, non-opioid ways of managing pain, and we want to try to shift the emphasis over in that direction.
Okay, so I see what you're saying. We've got to find new solutions to this new problem.
Exactly, and at both ends. Number one, at the entry end, when somebody's coming in, why does somebody come in? They've got an injury, they got pain, somebody gives them a narcotic. And then also, in the other end, when someone's seeking treatment, but they have pain, they still have to manage the pain, even if they're going to come off of the drugs. What are the non-pharmaceutical ways of dealing with that?
Okay. Doctor, thank you so much for the great work that you've been doing with the DEA and local law enforcement as well. Thank you. Our next guest is Jackie McGowan. She's with the Northwest Families Against Narcotics. They're the awesome people that are putting on tonight's show. It's an organization, if you need help or if you want to refer somebody, they should look up, again, the Northwest Families Against Narcotics chapter. Jackie, what's the first thing a parent should do or a caregiver should do when they suspect there might be a drug problem with a family member or a friend?
The first thing I would recommend is that they get educated and that they start seeking support. There is strength in support. You are not alone.
Do you find that there's a stigma? Some people are just embarrassed and afraid to reach out?
I felt that shame myself, yes. 7 years ago when we began our journey, I was driving long distances to go to cities to get support where people wouldn't recognize me.
Is that right? I know you've got family members, that one in particular that may be a drug addict. What was your epiphany moment?
My epiphany moment, when I realized that my misery, my depression, my chaos couldn't cure my son. That every morning I had the blessing to make a choice.
Okay.
And that was to experience joy or to experience misery, and that was no fun.
And then you found FAN.
Yes, I found FAN and being part of a solution, yes.
Oh, that's awesome. Where can folks get more help about FAN?
You can look at familiesagainstnarcotics.org, I would also look up Hope Not Handcuffs, and we have another resource, Detroit Wayne Mental Health Authority.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for the great work you are doing. All right, that's our show for tonight. I thank you all for tuning in. It's now to get this amazing family, the Northwest Wayne Families Against Narcotic evening event off. I want to turn it over to their awesome president, Lauren Russo.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much for coming. We're obviously very excited by this event and so excited to see so many of you here to hear and learn about this important issue that we're dealing with today. So this is the Northwest Wayne Families Against Narcotics big event, a closer look. And tonight our plan is to take a closer look at the risks associated with illicit and prescription drug use, the reality of addiction, and strategies for keeping your family and your kids safe and healthy. I'm going to start by giving just a little bit of information about Northwest Wayne Families Against Narcotics. In just a few minutes, you're going to be hearing from Families Against Narcotics Executive Director, Judge Linda Davis. She's going to give you a little more information about the organization as a whole, but I want to tell you just a little bit about our chapter in particular. There are 22 chapters of Family Against Narcotics in the state of Michigan right now. We're based in Canton, and we started in April 2017. We were the first chapter in Wayne County. Since then, we've been joined by another chapter, the Downriver chapter, and so we are the 2 chapters right now in Wayne County. Our mission is essentially the same as all Families Against Narcotics chapters, which is to provide resources, education, and support to families and individuals who've been impacted by addiction. We do that in a variety of ways. I'm going to give you just a little information about that because I have a lot to say before we get to our main event. So just to briefly touch on that. One thing that we do, and all fan chapters do, is have monthly public forums. Our monthly forum is the first Monday of every month. It takes place at the Summit on the Park in Canton, and these are essentially educational forums where we have different speakers or panels of speakers come in to talk about issues related to addiction. Just to give you an example, our most recent one in May, on May 6th, we had a recovery panel. We had 5 people in recovery from addiction, 4 from opioids, 1 from alcohol, and all of them had followed different pathways in order to get into recovery and follow a different approach to maintaining their recovery. So that was one of the ones we did. Our upcoming one is addiction in the criminal justice system. So we have a judge, we have a prosecuting attorney, a defense attorney, we've got jail administrators who will be on that panel talking about the issues they deal with addiction and also entertaining questions from our audience. So that's our monthly public forum. The other thing that we do is we have 2 support groups that meet twice a month each, also in Canton, but at different locations. So we have a family and friends support group. That's for individuals who have family members, loved ones who struggle with addiction. That's the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of every month. We also have a grief support group that also meets the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of every month, and that's for people who've lost a loved one as a result of addiction, because we think that people who've suffered that kind of loss require a special kind of support of people who really understand what they've been going through and what they're dealing with. In addition to those different groups, we have speakers at events. We do other special events like this. We do an International Overdose Awareness Day event every year on August 31st, and that type of thing. I'm not going to go into any more detail really about what we do at this point. There is also a program called Hope Not Handcuffs. I don't want to steal any of Judge Davis's thunder, so I'm going to let her talk about that program. But there is a resource table that is out in the lobby that hopefully you had the opportunity to stop by. And if you didn't, maybe on your way out, you might want to do that. There's more specific information about what we do. The information about locations and times for our meetings are there. And you also would have the opportunity to sign a sheet that would include your email address and your name if you want to get essentially on our mailing list so that you can be aware of all of our upcoming events and our upcoming public forums and that type of thing. So now I would like to give thanks to some folks, some individuals and organizations that provided us with a tremendous amount of support for this event. And if I could ask to have the house lights brought up just a touch so that I can see people, because right now I'm blinded. So the first person I want to thank was not on my original script, but I think it's the most important person, quite frankly, we need to thank, and that would be Dara Cockrum. So, Dara, would you please stand? So, Dara is our chapter's vice president, and this is her brainchild, this event, and she almost single-handedly did so much of the work that was required to make this happen. So we're incredibly grateful to her, and she also was kind of cracking the whip on all of us to make us get the things done we needed to get done. But without her, we wouldn't all be here tonight. So thank you so much, Dara. Other people I want to thank. We need to thank the Canton Community Foundation. The Canton Community Foundation gave us a wonderful grant some time ago, and that grant is what's primarily funding this event. So we're very grateful to them. We would like to thank the Jamie Daniels Foundation in partnership with the CHM Foundation for their support of the event. You're going to be hearing more about that foundation in just a little bit during Ken Daniels' keynote speech. We'd like to thank Canton Township for its amazing support, not only of this event, but of our fan chapter since we came into existence in April 2017. I know that Canton Township Supervisor Pat Williams is here. I saw him in the lobby. So if he'd stand up for just a second or wave his hand, could you please acknowledge him? I'd like to thank the Fraser and Canton Police Departments for going to all the work and bringing their drug display here out in the lobby. Hopefully all of you had an opportunity to take a look at that. I think that was kind of amazing to see all the different things that were there. I'd also like to acknowledge Frank Ruggiero from Plymouth Canton Community School District for his help in promoting this event to the people who most need the information that we're sharing. Thank you, Frank. I'd like to thank 88.1 The Park Radio. This is a local Plymouth Canton radio station that helped us to promote the event. And of course, I want to thank C&R Marketing, who you just saw them do their work up here on the stage, for providing us with marketing and expert social media exposure. So thanks to them. And then thanks also to the Village Theater and Vassal's Main Street Catering. How'd you guys like the food? Pretty great, right? So they gave us a break on the pricing for the food for that and a break on the price of the theater, and so we're very grateful for that. And finally, I would like to acknowledge our gold sponsors. We had a variety of sponsors for this event, and I want to expressly acknowledge our gold sponsors. We had 5 of them. So first, there was GrowthWorks. I'm going to tell you just a very little bit about each one. GrowthWorks is a leading Canton-based treatment provider that supports youth and families dealing with a range of substance abuse challenges through evidence-based treatments and solutions. I'd also like to thank our gold sponsor, Orexo. Orexo is the manufacturer and distributor of the opioid addiction medication Zubsolv. Orexo's primary focus is to provide effective treatment for opioid dependence and pain. I'd also like to thank Newport Academy. Newport Academy is a highly respected treatment organization that treats teens, ages 12 to 20, struggling with depression, anxiety, eating disorders, trauma, and substance abuse through family-focused programming. Another gold sponsor that we're very grateful for is the Edward C. Levy Company. They provide services that include construction materials, road building, steel mill services, logistics, and laboratory testing. At Levy, the values of integrity, honesty, and strong work ethic shape the culture there. And then lastly, I'd like to thank a couple that came together, 2 individuals as our gold sponsors, and that is Dave and Mary Dietrich. So thanks to them as well for supporting our program. So if I could just get from you all a round of applause, not just for our gold sponsors, but for all of our sponsors that are listed here and also in the lobby. Okay, last little bit of housekeeping before I move on, before we get to move on for the main event. When you came in, you received a program and hopefully also received a 3x5 card. Is that right? So here's the plan with the 3x5 cards. A little later in the program, we're going to have a panel discussion, and there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions of the panelists. You have 2 options for asking the questions. If you want to, you can write your question down on that 3x5 card, and we're going to have people running up and down the aisles collecting cards and bringing them up here to the stage so that your question can be asked. Your other option is that we're also going to have people on either side of the aisle with a microphone. And so if you would prefer to stand up in front of all of these people and you're not nervous about that and want to ask your question, you can do it that way. But if you're not comfortable with that, you can write it on the 3x5 card. All right. It is now my privilege and honor to introduce one of my heroes, Families Against Narcotics Executive Director, Judge Linda Davis. I'm not done yet. I'm not done. Judge Davis was one of the founders of FAN in 2008. She served at its board of directors. She served on the board of directors until just last month when she took a paid position as the organization's executive director. Judge Davis was appointed to serve as a judge in the 41B District Court in Mount Clemens in March 2000, and she remained on the bench until her retirement from that job last month. During her tenure as a district court judge, relatively early on, she implemented a drug court at that court and graduated many participants from the court. She was appointed by Michigan's governor to chair the Michigan Prescription Drug and Opioid Abuse Commission. She was the founder of Operation RX, which is a Macomb County initiative aimed at preventing abuse, addiction, and overdoses. And she's received all kinds of prestigious awards from the FBI, from Care House, Girl Scouts of the United States, Macomb Community College, Henry Ford Hospital, Leadership Macomb, and others. She was even inducted into the City of Macomb Hall of Fame. Judge Davis speaks throughout the state as a president and now as executive director of Families Against Narcotics on subjects of addiction and opioid epidemic. Please welcome Judge Linda Davis. No, okay, all right. I knew you would want
get the lights up, or
if you
want
want.
me to kill myself?
Can we get the lights up? She's gonna walk around.
Okay. Yeah. I don't like podiums. It's really a pleasure. Wow. It's really a pleasure. Now I know what it's like to be a movie star. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight. I'm going to share just a little bit of my story and how FAN got started and then what we're accomplishing. And then my biggest privilege tonight is going to be to introduce your keynote speaker. About 13 years ago, I was very much prejudiced against addiction. I truly thought that people that had addictions were morally inept and had something wrong with them. As a judge and as a prosecutor, I was very proud of the fact that I locked up people that used drugs. And I did it because I thought I was keeping our community safe. And then 13 years ago, we had several of our neighborhood kids that passed away to overdoses to opiates. And they were kids that I knew that didn't quite fit the category that I just explained to you. In addition to that, I was raising a 17-year-old daughter who was a straight-A student, an athlete, had been accepted to every college that she applied to. And late one night, I was awakened in the middle of the night, and I heard her crying and went into her bedroom and learned through a discussion with her after 2 hours of painstaking discussion and her starting to get sick that she was addicted to opiates. She had had a knee surgery 6 months prior to that. Little did I know that what I was giving my daughter to take every 4 hours was a pill that was very much like heroin. She established an addiction and ended up addicted to heroin. The next 3 years of my life was pretty miserable. We always talk about how awful it is for people in recovery, but it's equally as awful for parents that are watching their kids suffer, knowing that we cannot do anything to save them as hard as we try. I truly thought that loving her better, bigger, and harder would be the way to help her through her addiction. And the truth of the matter is I almost loved her to death. I kept her in her addiction, not because I was a bad mom, but because I didn't know how to love someone with a substance use disorder. So it was through that journey and being humiliated myself with the stigma of addiction and finding out how people are treated that are going through the process that really began to change my heart and change how I looked at addiction. When I took my daughter to the hospital that morning to detox, and that's a long story on how we got there, but it was done as a favor to me because of who I am. And I realized that people that don't have a name behind them and some authority in the community probably don't get the benefits that I was getting. As bad as they were still benefits. And while I was standing there, I walked out into the hallway to call my secretary to tell her that I was going to not be into work for a while. And I heard a nurse and a doctor talking about the pathetic mom crying over her junkie kid. And I could not tell you the shame that I felt at that moment. I knew that I couldn't talk about this because it was something I was supposed to be ashamed of. And I wondered how I was going to navigate a system that was so prejudiced not only against my child, but against me. And I was so afraid that because I was an elected official, that if I did talk about this, that no one would ever vote for me again. I'm proud to tell you that one of the biggest challenges I ever did in my life was stand on a stage talking about this, but it's also one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done. I heard someone say sometimes that sometimes the right thing is not the easy thing. And that's exactly true, and it's why so many of our children are dying, is because we keep this a secret. And we're not willing as a community to come out, support, and talk about this. And until we do, things are not going to change. So it became my passion and my mission to change the way addiction is looked at in this country. And I think we've made a real dent. We are now one of the most respected organizations in the state of Michigan. People are literally throwing money at us to keep doing what we're doing. We have 22 chapters in the state of Michigan that are doing what this wonderful Northwest Wayne chapter is doing. And 2 years ago, we launched a program called Hope Not Handcuffs, where we started out with partnering with 13 police departments. And it was a program that they opened their doors and said, if you are suffering from a substance use disorder, it doesn't matter which one, you can come in and ask us for help, and we will not arrest you, but we will walk you into treatment. They call us, we send an angel, who truly are just wonderful, non-judgmental people that will help fill out paperwork to get the process started. We now also send a peer recovery coach along with that angel so that you have a buddy to do recovery with from step A through step Z. And then we start the process of getting you inpatient. We have placed in the last 2 years over 2,800 people into treatment through that process. Thank you. In addition to that, we now have close to 1,000 angels that work with us in the state of Michigan. We work with almost 80 police departments in 8 different counties. And this year, we've received a very large grant to take this into every community in Michigan. It's grassroots, boots on the ground that is what's getting the job done and is what really is changing the face of addiction in our nation and in our state and in your community. So we invite you to be a part of that process. One of the things that stands as a real barrier to getting things done are when we work in silos. And FAN stands for working in partnerships, and this is a perfect segue into my next job here. We work with people, not against them. We invite you to be part of our organization, not abandon yours, but let's work together as a team. I was very fortunate early on to meet a man who I believe is making a huge difference across the nation, and particularly in Michigan, when it comes to talking about addiction, how we got here, how big the problem is, and the pain that it is causing our communities. We work in partnership oftentimes at these events. There's not a time that I call Ken Daniels and ask him to do an event that he's ever told me no. We've flown in airplanes up to the Upper Peninsula, and when I called him and invited him to this program, without hesitation, his answer is yes. He is one of the unfortunate parents, and I will let him tell you his story. But we should be very grateful because Ken Daniels is an announcer for the Red Wings, play-by-play, as most of you know. And that's a great job, but what is more important is he is a father. And he is a father with a mission, and fathers with missions are what we need. We oftentimes come to events and we see a lot of moms, but we don't see the dads. And I really applaud Ken for coming forward, being bold, and talking about something that has hurt him at the soul level. And he is making so many strides. He is my dear friend. I cannot say enough wonderful things about this man. I now introduce you to your keynote speaker, Ken Daniels.
Thank you. Thanks, Linda. Thank you, Linda. And wonderful that you are all here tonight. Wish we didn't need to be here, but we all are. We're not here to see through one another. We're here to see one another through. And this is why we're here tonight. The late, great Ernie Harwell said, if God gives you a job you enjoy, you've never worked a day in your life. That's been my story. I like to tell people I work 24/7, 24 hours a week, 7 months a year. Back in the day when I started in Detroit, I used to work 9 months a year. What happened? We'll hopefully get back to that stage once again. I've lived my life by the 4 Ps, although as I get older, those seem to come more frequently between midnight and 5 a.m. However, passion, perseverance, perspiration, and preparation. That's how I've lived my life. I prepared for what I am doing with the Detroit Red Wings since the age of 8, when I began calling play-by-play in my family living room in Toronto. It was also the year that the Toronto Maple Leafs last won the Stanley Cup. So if you want to find out how old I am, Google it. You'll figure it out. But my parents would always send me to bed a little bit early on those nights. Maybe they grew tired of my play-by-play, mixing up Dave Keon for Red Kelly. I don't know. Perhaps that was why. And then I went to sleep with a little yellow Panasonic radio underneath my pillow, where I'd listen to Foster Hewitt, the man who initiated He Shoots, He Scores, or Dan Kelly from Toronto. I'd find him on the radio dial at KMOX 1120 out of St. Louis. So I was preparing for what I'm doing today since the age of 8, but going on 23 years with the Red Wings and nearly 2,000 games called for Detroit after leaving Hockey Night in Canada, nothing could prepare me for December 7th of 2016 when a Birmingham police officer knocked on my door. Jamie had been in and out of rehab but had moved down to Florida, where he'd been doing quite well working for a law firm and was 7 months sober. When the officer, Joe Bunting, whom I did not know, and I knew some of the other Birmingham police officers who I'm told didn't want to come to my house to have to tell me that. So they sent Joe, whom I didn't know. And hopefully none of you have ever hugged a police officer with a bulletproof vest for some time. It's not a comfortable feeling. And at those moments, all I could think of is, how am I going to tell his mother? And how am I going to tell his beautiful sister, who is 3 years younger? But it's the shame and stigma that precludes recovery in addiction, because only Jamie's mom, his sister, and I knew of the struggles that Jamie had. He'd been in Brighton, here in Michigan, didn't want me to come visit him in Brighton for the short time he was there, because someone may notice Ken Daniels, the television play-by-play voice of the Detroit Red Wings. Jamie wanted his journey to be a success. We thought it would be. Ultimately, on December 7, 2016, he passed in Florida. The broken recovery industry helped to do him in. So after Jamie's passing became public, and still we didn't know the real reason until toxicology reports came about 5 months later, although we knew as a family, and a 23-year-old, his heart just doesn't stop in his sleep. But Scott Oak from Hockey Night in Canada called me a day later when news spread around the sports world of what happened. Scott's son Bruce had died 2 years earlier from a heroin overdose. Scott and I talked, and still I never said what happened, but we just knew it was the unspoken truth. And Scott said to me, Ken, I can't tell you what to say, what to do. At some point in all of this, you'll find your voice. I can't tell you when it is, but you'll find your voice. Scott was right, but I didn't find that voice until some 7 months later when I had written a book, If These Walls Could Talk. It had come out in September, and Craig Custance from the Athletic Pay Service, the subscription pay service, which is a wonderful sports service, called me to talk about my book. And at the end of the book, he said, how you doing? Not like Joey from Friends, how you doing? But how you doing? And to anyone here who's lost anyone or knows someone who's lost someone, never stop saying to that person, how you doing? It matters. It matters. Reach out all the time, it matters. There isn't a day right now where I go 5 minutes without thinking about my son, but I love to talk about Jamie because it keeps his memory alive. Ignoring it doesn't help someone. Don't think that those who've lost someone, and it's different with a parent we've lost. I lost my dad at 96, I lost my mom at 85, and they were in great health at the time. And then they went. It's different when you lose a child. We all know that. And don't stop talking to people about who've lost. We want to keep their memories alive. And at the end, when he said, "How you doing?" and I told him Jamie's story, because again, 7 months later, we'd never told Jamie's story. It's the shame and the stigma of addiction. And his words to me were two. At the end of that, "Holy crap, this story needs to be told." So I did, and he wrote it, which led to ESPN E60 calling me, and they did a half-hour documentary on Jamie's story, which was a finalist 2 nights ago in New York for Sports Journalism Emmy Award, The Florida Shuffle. It did not win, but the point was that Jamie's story was told and people saw it. Here's a snippet of that. My son got baited and trapped. It's one thing to have an addiction, but then when bad people get involved and they contribute to it, that makes you sick.
Jamie first tried rehab in Michigan, but relapsed 2 weeks later. In April 2016, he and his parents decided a change of scenery would be best. So at age 22, Jamie boarded a plane for the recovery capital of America, Palm Beach County, Florida, home to hundreds of drug treatment centers, including Beachway, a top-of-the-line facility that costs $15,000 a month.
We didn't talk to him for probably the first 4 or 5 days. He was going through detox. But then when he called, and he sounded great. And he liked the people there, and they were helping him.
I thought this was going to be the godsend. He wants to be clean. We're really going to be on a good path here.
After Beachway, Jamie came here, Sober Living in Delray, a supervised apartment complex for recovering addicts. The cost, $980 a month.
He was working, he was going to meetings, he had the sponsor who's top of the line. He was doing everything right.
Jamie spent 5 months clean at Sober Living. Then, in November 2016, he decided to move into something called a sober home, a halfway house where recovering addicts live together. The cost, just $50 a month.
He thought in his mind, I'm taking the next step because I'm doing so well.
Do you think he was ready for that next step?
No. My biggest concern was that he hadn't thought about it thoroughly enough, and I think he kind of just made a decision and went with it.
Florida's recovery industry is largely unregulated, and many wind up like Jamie Daniels, caught in an insurance scam known as the Florida Shuffle.
In the Florida Shuffle, you go in and out of recovery, in and out of rehab centers, in and out of sober homes, milking the individual for their insurance until that person dies.
Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg says well-intentioned federal laws meant to protect addicts' privacy actually prevent authorities from regulating sober homes, making it easier to exploit those in recovery.
Deaths like Jamie Daniels is really hard to take because we know that deaths like his could possibly have been prevented if we just had the right laws on the books.
In 2016, in Palm Beach County, almost anyone could open a sober home. No credentials or certification required. Cade Potter says those managing the home where he lived with Jamie had no intention of keeping their clients clean.
There was a guy who lived inside of the sober living house that Emmanuel paid to sell drugs to us. And, you know, after maybe a month of dirty urines, they would say, okay, you got to go back to detox, but you can go here and they would have it all set up for you because they get paid to send you to detox, and they get paid to send you to treatment.
So they actually have a financial incentive for you not to get clean?
Yes.
The longer an addict stays at a sober home, the more profitable it is for those running it. And the key to the scam is insurance. Those in recovery like Jamie, who are still under their parents' insurance, are prime targets for what's known as patient brokers. People paid to lure addicts into sober homes with the promise of gift cards, cigarettes, or, in Jamie's case, cheap rent.
They'll see kids on the beaches walking with suitcases. They'll approach them. Do you have insurance? Yeah, well, I've got a place where you can live. It's only $50 a month or it's free. So he was thinking, hey, I'll have more money and I'll be good to go. He didn't know what he was getting into. He should have never been on Xanax. He should have never been in that place. Having good insurance put him in that place, we believe. I think all contributed to his death.
And it was just crazy to see how big of an impact his life made on other people. And just all the people reaching out saying, Jamie saved my life. I was addicted and Jamie saved my life. And now I'm doing this and I'm doing this. And I know deep down he is proud of us and he knows that we're making a difference for something that he was trying to overcome.
Jamie Daniels was just one of the 42,000 fatal opioid overdoses in the U.S. in 2016. Today in Florida, roughly 15 people die every day from overdoses.
And I'll say that the brain isn't the only organ affected by addiction. It also breaks hearts. 2.5 million Americans are addicted to opioids. They say time heals all wounds. It doesn't. There's a hole in our family's heart that will never be filled, but time does give us perspective because through our pain, we discover ourselves. If I only knew then what I know now, how the shame and stigma of addiction can preclude recovery. If it's not happening in your home, God bless you. Let me assure you, it's probably happening 2 or 3 doors down, and we need to talk about it. 4 out of 5 heroin users started on opioid prescriptions. It was in their medicine cabinet. After all, if a doctor prescribed it, it must be okay. Jamie started on opioids in his freshman year at Michigan State. How he went on to graduate with a 3.5 and then work in a law firm in Florida is a credit to him. But I know Jamie started on opioids at Michigan State because after he passed, the individual who started him on those opioids called me asking for my forgiveness. It was a shame that ever happened, but Jamie thought his recovery would certainly be a success. Of those people who use opioids, 90% of those started before the age of 18. For Jamie, who was no dummy, he felt he had ADHD, a self-diagnosis, but smart enough to fool the psychiatrist. He flunked the test because he wanted Adderall. Adderall is prevalent, especially in the colleges. Jamie wanted more time. We didn't think he needed it. We didn't think he had ADHD. And those who have it and need it, it can help, but it's overprescribed. And pill-pushing doctors, there were too many of them, and that's starting to change now, thankfully. Because when you start on Adderall, then you're in college, and then you sell the Adderall for the opioids. And then when the opioids become too expensive, you turn to heroin. Jamie, petrified of needles, never shot up, not that it mattered. But again, he was on the pills, and it's that shame and stigma, and why is it in our society that we can talk about any disease that we have, if it's that dreaded, awful disease of cancer, we'll talk about it. Men will even readily talk about testicular cancer. If that's what they had, no problem. Rectal cancer, we'll talk about it. Anything below the shoulders, we'll talk about it. Why of a mental illness, which is what addiction is? It's a chronic brain disorder. It's a mental illness. The glutamate receptors in your brains have changed, but we won't talk about it. We won't talk about anything above the shoulder. We need to talk more about mental illness. A play-by-play colleague of mine, I was on the road this past season, and another one of those where I said to him, "How you doing?" And he said, "You know what really pisses me off?" And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Your son tried." I said, "That he did." I said, "And so is your daughter." Because I knew his daughter had been in and out of 14 rehabs. And he said, "You know, it's sad to say, but I hate her." And I said, "You don't hate her. You can't hate someone for not getting what you think they should get." We would get pissed off at Jamie too, thinking, who could act like that? But addicts can also turn on a dime. Addicts can lie like that to get what they need. And they'll steal from you. They'll do whatever they can. So I said to him, "Don't hate your daughter. She doesn't understand." Again, the chemical receptors in the brain have changed. The cognitive reasoning, the ability to say no just isn't there. When the Reagans in the 80s said, "Say no to drugs," boy, that was a long time ago, wasn't it? Back in those days when THC in a joint was probably 3%, and now it's 16%. And now I hear stories where marijuana is even laced with fentanyl. And ultimately, it was fentanyl that killed my son. I'm not absolving Jamie for taking the pill that took his heart and shocked his heart in his sleep. But as we heard in that story, in Florida, and where patient brokering is so prevalent and now laws have changed, they want you to go through detox again. See a doctor. To get sick again, go through detox. That doctor sends out your lab tests. They send the insurance company. We got bills for over $60,000 within a couple of months. I got one bill from Jamie for $17,500 for peeing in a cup and doing blood work. That's what happens. Now, Blue Cross Blue Shield was terrific, and they're fraud investigators, and they're starting to clamp down on this. But that is what happens in the broken recovery industry, and laws are starting to change. And after what happened to Jamie on December 7th of 2016, that following summer, House Bill 807 came in that made patient brokering akin to racketeering, $50,000 fine and jail time, and they're starting to arrest those. And Kenneth Chapman, who was affiliated with the house where Jamie passed, is serving 27 years now in a federal prison. So we're starting to get people. We need to get more of them. Even Cade Potter, the guy you saw in that piece, when Jamie passed in his sleep that night in the bed next to Cade, they let him pass for an hour before they called paramedics because they wanted to clean up the house of drugs. And Cade was scared of Manuel, who was the house manager. Cade texted me 2 days after Jamie had died, and in our grief, he tried to extort money from me. He took Jamie's belongings because the police found nothing at the scene: his Beats headphones, his laptop computer, and other jewelry that he had is gone. We just wanted that back. But Cade, admitting his fear, that's his story. That is fine. Cade met Jamie at a 12-step program. Once you go through detox, and again, this is where people don't understand. Addicts don't want to be addicts. To go through detox is the sickest feeling you'll ever feel in the world. It's the worst flu you can ever imagine. So they get high again to avoid that. After going through detox, and Jamie was working at a law firm, we believe that Cade, who was in that piece, sought out Jamie at a 12-step program, and Jamie went to meetings religiously. One night, Jamie called me, and I said, "Where are you?" And he called me from his car in Florida, and he was driving, and I said, "I met this new kid, Dad. His name's Cade." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Awful story. His dad had killed himself. He's got no money." I said, "Where are you now?" He said, "Well, I gave him some money to go into Target to buy some T-shirts." That's who my son was. The kid who ultimately, we believe, patient brokered him. Jamie was buying him clothes so that he'd have an okay life. The last night I spoke to Jamie, the Red Wings had a game in Winnipeg. We talked after every game. And I called him, and he said, that was an awful game. I said, no, it wasn't. We won. He said, how did that happen? I turned it off after the first period. It was horrible. I said, I know. But they came back and they won. I said, what were you doing? And he said, I was painting the wheels of my car, of which I said, are you kidding me? And he said, no, you're going to love it, but I can't take pictures now. I'll show you when I get to work in the morning. I said, okay. Jamie never got to work in the morning. Some have said that Jamie's use of opioids started after he got his wisdom teeth out. We had flushed his medication, which is something you should not do, by the way. You can dispose of medication properly. Why doctors give out so much Vicodin, I have no idea. But his did not start after his wisdom teeth were out. But think about this number for a moment, that if 4 million young adults have their wisdom teeth out each year, studies have shown that those who are prescribed opioids, 50,000 young adults a year, because they've had their wisdom teeth out and are prescribed an opioid medication, a prescription med, will have persistent opioid use. 50,000 a year. And I guess the numbers back it up somewhat, because in 2018, we lost more Americans to an opioid addiction than in the wars of Vietnam and Iraq combined. Think about that. And you don't know what you're taking today. A speck of fentanyl, which shocked Jamie's heart that much in the pill that he took, because the doctor where Jamie was had put him on Xanax. So Jamie was patient brokered to a home where they were sent to a doctor who prescribed a recovering addict Xanax. And 4 days later, he was gone. And another doctor who he had seen, Michael Ligotti, being investigated by the FBI, had forged Jamie's signatures on forms, because when we got those forms back from Blue Cross Blue Shield, Jamie was with us here over Thanksgiving. And he was with me at a hockey game at Joe Louis Arena. So he couldn't possibly have seen that doctor to get his blood taken. So I'm asking all of you here tonight to tell 10 people what you heard tonight from all the wonderful speakers who are here, Linda Davis, and those who will follow me in our panel discussion. To tell people what you heard here tonight, because we need to continue the conversation. And if we need to scare the kids into never taking anything, and abstinence would be key, because you just don't know. A brain can be addicted within 5 days, just like my son. Use Jamie's story. Use Jamie's name. Go to jamiedanielsfoundation.org. We've got the sites on there. If you know someone who is struggling, where to go. They're vetted. And the FAN is on there. Hope Not Handcuffs is on there. And throughout Michigan and throughout the United States, and we're updating it as we speak. Go to jamiedanielsfoundation.org. Our mission is to build long-term, safe, sober recovery housing out of detox, that parents with children, young adults, find a job, will help them find work and have a safe place to live, so what happened to Jamie doesn't happen to anyone else. I'll leave you with this thought of who my son truly was. About 5 years ago, he gave me this birthday gift, and he said, it's just a coupon. He said, this coupon is for a 1-hour complimentary back massage given by your daughter, Arlen. Happy birthday, love Jamie. Jamie loved to laugh. We're glad you did. Thank you.
Feel privileged to hear him talk, because he truly is a remarkable man doing so many good things. I wanted to let you know that FAN does a lot of things, and one of the things that we've done, we are not allowed to be involved in a lot of legislation, but I did go to a legislator recently and said, you know, we know that kids are getting addicted to opiates because of teeth being pulled and sports injuries, and yet no one is telling the parents. I work with hundreds of families almost monthly that are dealing with this, and the one comment that they say to me all the time, over and over again, is, if I had just known. I feel that way. I was my daughter's first pill pusher, because every 4 hours I made her take that Vicodin. And if parents only knew that in just 5 days their kids can become addicted to these drugs, we would not let them take them. We would look for alternatives. So we convinced some legislators to push through a video. It's a 9-minute video that talks about sports injuries and gives parents and athletes education in just 9 short minutes of what every parent and every athlete in a school setting should know. You are going to watch that video now. Thank you.
So I go out there and I'm coming down the ice, I remember it like yesterday, on the left side of the rink, and I'm coming down right-handed, I'm shooting, and I trip and fall, and I went full speed into the boards with my legs right in front of me, snapped my ankle in half in my skate.
So my first injury was during basketball season. I dove for a loose ball and I twisted my knee and kind of tried to walk it off and noticed something felt funny. So I went to the doctor, they did an MRI, and I had a torn meniscus. While I was in high school, and shortly after, I had another 2 surgeries, so I always had prescriptions around. It was pretty readily available.
From the time he was probably, I would say, 8, 9 years old, he played baseball, basketball, then he got into football in high school. Just loved football. He played it for 2 years. In 2008, he got an injury. He fractured his ankle and pulled a hamstring. He went to the doctor, and of course, you know, like any doctor, they have to do something for the pain, so he thought, okay. I had no problem with it. At that time, I didn't know, you know, about opiates or anything like that. So I gave him medication, let him do it on his own. You know, he's 16 years old. The pills were running out very quickly. So he's, Mom, you know, I'm in pain. I need to go back to the doctor. I take him back to the doctor, of course. Doctor prescribes another prescription with no problem.
We know that teens and adolescents don't have fully formed brains. And so some of the control centers of the brain and some of the centers of the brain that help with thought and processing and also reward the idea of how high or how good you feel from a substance aren't fully formed in the brain. And exposures to substances, including alcohol, tobacco, but opioids as well, even though these are prescription medications, have the potential to lead a young adult towards higher rates of addiction later in life.
And the injuries that soccer had given me, you know, by the time I was in 8th grade, I was already prescribed Vicodin. By the time I was a sophomore, I was being prescribed morphine, and you know, that eventually that chemical addiction just took over.
I played football and I wrestled, and I was a great football player, and I was a varsity football player by the time I was 16 years old, and I got an injury and the doctor prescribed me Vicodin. And as a result of being prescribed Vicodin, I picked up this addiction, and I was addicted to pills, and I was a kid.
Perception of risk was really low because it was prescribed by a doctor, so I didn't see any reason why I couldn't take it whenever I felt the need to take it.
Come to find out years down the road that those are the strongest pills that you could get is basically heroin, you know what I mean? And I had no clue, and then it just felt great, and I thought, yo, the doctor's prescribing them to me, so what's wrong with it, you know what I mean? And then it just became a disaster, and I just started selling my own stuff that I had. My sticks, I would tell the trainers that I needed new sticks, you know, $200 sticks, and then I would just go pawn them or sell them to somebody just to get pills. Anything I had to do to get them, because I couldn't go to practice. I couldn't even play. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even wake up unless I had the pills next to my bed.
Cody lived on the streets. He lived in abandoned buildings. He robbed drug dealers. He did everything he possibly could to get his hands on heroin.
That morning, my husband found him. My son swallowed all the packets of heroin. Died instantly, according to what they're telling me. He ingested enough heroin, and take that bag of heroin and fentanyl. The fentanyl was enough to kill 15 people.
Yes, there was stuff I took. I took sleeping stuff, and I took pain stuff, and I took stuff just to get through things. Throughout my career, I broke my leg. I had 3 knee surgeries. I had 2 back surgeries, and then 4 or 5 concussions. And if there was stuff that you could take to make you get through it or feel better, I was not too afraid to do it or try it.
I enjoyed three years in the NFL, which is considered the average. 3 years. So I ended up getting hurt in my 3rd season. I tore my ACL, and I'll never forget when I realized that pain prescription, was a problem. And when I received my medication for the Vicodin, and 2 of my teammates asked me to come over if they could have some pills because they had some injuries. And my response was pretty much, well, you need to go see the trainer because, I'm not a doctor and I'm not, not allowed to be doing this. I'm pretty sure it's illegal to be handing out prescription drugs, so.
We understand what it means to play, baseball every single day, and how quickly someone can become addicted to these drugs. Baseball inherently is an unnatural sport, overhand throwing and rotational, puts a lot of stress on the elbows, shoulders, joints, hips, knees. One wrong injury, one shoulder surgery, one elbow surgery, all of a sudden, Oxycontin and Vicodin, and you're hooked and you could be out of baseball.
There's injuries that are going to come with the sport, and if it doesn't happen to you, you're lucky. But if more than not, there's going to be an injury along the way, especially in a rough sport like that. And if you can know ahead of time the risks that you're going to be taking if you take those painkillers, then you can stop a lot of the disaster from happening that happened to me down the road.
You have a duty to your child to make sure you understand what you're handing out to him. Even if it does come from the doctor, you become the conduit that's giving him that substance, him or her that substance. So ask the questions, is this really necessary? Do you need 60 Vicodin, or can you get away with 3 of them and then take Motrin? Or can you get away with none of them?
To be honest with you, I think the most important thing is getting the athletes involved and the athletes speaking out. It goes from basketball to football to baseball to hockey. It's a situation that, and an environment that we all grew up with and gone through. But the one common thing is it's up to the families and the individual involved to make sure that they're aware of the complications that come with all of it.
Those kids who get an opioid are more likely to move down a path of chronic use. And so I think it is important for parents to always consider how appropriate each prescription opioid pain medication is. And that can be a challenging place for parents to be questioning the physician that's caring for their child or the dentist that's caring for their child, but you certainly have to be your own advocate.
They're not going to probably ask questions. They're probably not going to push back, so they're going to do what they're told, which is written on the prescription, and I think that's another problem that we have, and that's why the parents have to really wrap and engage and let their children know it's okay to question the taking of pain medication and narcotics.
I wish I would have known when he was 16. I just wish I would have known. I would have changed it all, or at least tried to. Maybe the outcome wouldn't be I lost my son.
So Families Against Narcotics premiered that video here tonight, and so I want to thank Judge Davis for sharing that with us. It is now my privilege to introduce Dr. Carl Christensen to you. Dr. Christensen is a board-certified addiction medicine specialist and medical director of the Michigan Health Professional Recovery Home, which monitors nurses, pharmacists, and doctors with substance use disorder. He's also the medical director for Dawn Farm, a highly respected addiction treatment facility in Ann Arbor. He's received numerous teaching awards. He's been named one of the top docs in addiction medicine by Our Magazine. He's a frequent speaker on the subject of addiction and the brain, and we are privileged to have him sit on the Families Against Narcotics Northwest Wayne Advisory Board. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation to speak tonight. Let's see here. So I'd like to start off by thanking the folks that I work with and who have helped train me, including Dr. Maroney up in Saginaw, Dr. Juni, who's an addiction psychiatrist at U of M, and also Families Against Narcotics. And we're going to be talking about cannabis because cannabis is being touted as the answer, and I want to talk about that tonight also. But the first thing is if you're talking about marijuana or cannabis, how do you get it in your body? And there are different ways to do it. One is vaping, which is at the upper left, or you can smoke it, which is the upper right, or you can eat it, which is the lower left. And finally, we have cannabidiol, which is CBD oil. And you may have heard about this in the news lately. This is being touted as a treatment for opioid dependence by Dr. Yasmin Hurd. And she has done work that has shown that if opioid addicts who are going through withdrawal get this CBD oil, their anxiety level drops dramatically. She has also shown that if you use cannabis on a regular basis, that your DNA is permanently changed and that your offspring, even if you have stopped using cannabis, are more likely to become addicted. So she is not an advocate for legal use of marijuana. And again, CBD oil is available as a prescription over on the right, Epidiolex. It's I think $7,000 a month, and it was approved by the FDA for use in intractable childhood seizures. You can also go out and get CBD oil anywhere here in Michigan. You can get it at the gas station pretty much. You have to be aware that it's classified as hemp, which is very low concentrations of CBD. But a lot of people who use CBD oil will test positive for THC, and that can affect you in terms of employment, getting into school, etc. So CBD oil that we buy in the store is not pure CBD, and the only pure form is reserved for childhood epilepsy. So when you talk about marijuana being legal, there's different levels that we've gone through here in Michigan. We started off with medical marijuana, and what that means is that a physician can certify somebody to use marijuana. It's not prescribed. They have to come back every few years, but they have a chronic condition that is benefited by using marijuana. Or we can have decriminalization, which there's probably a few of us here in the audience old enough to remember back in Ann Arbor in the 60s, Ann Arbor decriminalized marijuana. It turned into a $5 ticket, but it was not approved to be sold or manufactured or anything else. And then you have what we just passed here in Michigan. Congratulations. We now have commercialization of marijuana, which means that there are going to be marijuana dispensaries, marijuana stores, edibles, and we have been guaranteed by the people who are going to make money off this that they will control it and that nobody will be harmed. And I've heard medical directors of medical marijuana clinics say that cannabis is safer than coffee. I'll show you some evidence, and you can decide which way you feel. How about your job? Michigan is an at-will state, meaning that if you are working in a hospital or anywhere and you are subjected to a random drug screen or a pre-employment drug screen, you can either lose your job or never get the job in the first place. So having a medical marijuana card does not guarantee employment, and I can't tell you how many hospital employees I've seen who flunked a random drug screen, had been at the hospital for years working in healthcare, and were just up and fired. And there really is no solution to that. So there's a lot going on now about vaping of marijuana. And this study came out a while ago, and there was a lot of play in the press showing that vaping is an excellent way to get high on THC. And what they did was they compared smoked marijuana to vaped THC oil. And the smoked is red and the vaped is green. And they looked at different things like euphoria, side effects, paranoia, inability to drive. And they found that vaping made you higher, more paranoid, and dumber. Okay? And that dumber can extend to somebody who's driving. So you have higher distractibility. And that makes it more dangerous to drive. And you may have also heard that the state of Michigan gave up trying to analyze whether or not somebody was under the influence if they had a driving accident, and that is still all up on the air as well. So is marijuana getting stronger? And you all know the answer to this. But if you look at this graph, the bottom line, the blue line, is CBD concentration. It's not going up, and actually a lot of marijuana is grown to get rid of the CBD because it's believed to inhibit with the euphoria that you get from marijuana. But if you happen to allegedly be a hypothetical high school student in 1969 who was smoking marijuana, allegedly you'd be exposed to about 0.5 to 1% strength. And then if you look at every 10 years going down the line, 1979, 1989, 99, and 2009, it's now about 20 times as strong or even more. And that is something that is going up and up, and you hear stories about edibles that are 50% or more THC pure, and they look like candy, and you can bet that if a kid saw it, they would probably try and eat it. The concentration is enormously higher than it was back in the 60s and 70s. Now, so what? If you're an alcoholic, you don't get rid of your alcoholism by drinking beer, which has a low concentration of alcohol. Drinking beer and drinking whiskey, which is much stronger, are both alcohol, and they can both cause alcoholism. So a lot of people are saying that we are throwing up a smokescreen by saying that marijuana is stronger, so we have to be careful. And is there anything to say that there's a problem with having 20, 30% THC around? So here's a study that looked at the first arrow you see are the number of marijuana users over about a 30-year period, and it's going up, yes, but it's not going up an incredible amount. But if you look at THC potency, it's skyrocketing, and the line right next to that are admissions for treatment for cannabis dependence. They're identical lines. So as THC potency goes up, admissions and treatment for THC also go up. Marijuana is the most common drug that is illicit that people seek treatment for after something like alcohol. So it is a very, very common cause of treatment for addiction. So does it cause motor accidents? And if you listen to the news, they'll say that nothing happened in Colorado. Colorado's a great place. But this was a study done across the country by Dr. Lee, and what they found was that it makes a difference what your state does when it changes the laws for cannabis. And what they found was that if you legalize marijuana, that there is no increase in the percent of motor fatalities that involve THC. But if you legalize it, meaning commercialize it and make it easily available, there are more and more people who are dying who have positive THC tests in their bodies when they have autopsies. It's going up. But just for medical marijuana alone, it's not. This sign, I think, has been around Michigan. It says, states that legalize marijuana had 25% fewer opioid-related deaths. I think you've seen that if you're driving around. And here's where that study came from. It's Dr. Bachhuber in 2014 in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And what they found was that states that had medical marijuana laws, the bottom line, had lower opioid overdose mortality than states that didn't, which is the line with the green arrow on top. And one strange thing is, if you look at the end of the study, which is 2010, these arrows are suddenly coming together. But this is the graph that the legalization advocates have been using to say that this is why we should legalize marijuana. It will save lives. But another study showed that the only time that you have decreases in deaths is when you have medical marijuana dispensaries, which means that you also buy into everything else that can happen, including increased crime and increased motor vehicle accidents. And this was a study done recently by the RAND Corporation. And another study that was done using something that's easy to pronounce, the National Epidemiologic Survey on Alcohol and Related Conditions, which was a nationwide survey of alcohol and drug abuse, found exactly the opposite. That what happened was when you have patients who are using medical marijuana, their opioid use goes up. And their illicit opioid use goes up also. So they found the exact opposite conclusion of Dr. Bachhuber, but the only study you're going to see that anyone ever talks about is Dr. Bachhuber's study. And this was from 2018, Dr. Olson. So this is a recently released editorial by Dr. Keith Humphreys was the senior author. He's out in California saying, let's hold on a minute. There is not enough evidence to say that cannabis is a way out. And that when people say that you can replace opioid dependence with cannabis use, in my experience, and I have a lot of patients who try to do this, somebody who's either coming off pain pills or wants to come off medication-assisted therapy for opioid dependence, they tell me I'm going to start using medical marijuana, and I caution them, and without almost any exception, they wind up being stuck using both cannabis and opioids. So they just wind up buying another addiction rather than replacing it. So is marijuana addicting? And you will hear that marijuana is completely safe, and I heard the statement at a FAM meeting last year from a medical director from a medical marijuana clinic that it is safer than coffee. So addiction that we've been talking about tonight is characterized primarily by craving, not withdrawal. Once the drug is gone, withdrawal is temporary, but once the drug is gone, my mind still craves it. And I have to use it compulsively, and I lose control, and I use despite consequences. That's what we call the 4 C's. And the estimate is that 9% of cannabis users become addicted. And that's not a small number if you're talking about millions of people using cannabis and also legalizing it. So people who were not going to become addicted may now become addicted because of legalization. And once you become addicted to one drug, because your brain has changed, and you heard Ken talk about that, the brain changes that occur, you are more likely to become addicted to another drug because of your brain changes, and that's known as addiction transfer. You heard stories about people switching from opioids to Xanax to stimulants and back and forth. And there's a special feature of addiction called salience. Salience means that I can walk into a wedding reception and look around once and find out where the bar is, okay? What's important to me will stand out to me. That's salience. And salience occurs with cannabis use, and loss of normal pleasure also occurs with cannabis use. And that's another feature of addiction. If I become addicted to a drug, nothing else is really enjoyable anymore. And that happens with cannabis use. It's been shown to happen. And you hear people say, well, nothing's as bad as tobacco, so leave us alone. We don't want to talk about cannabis. And you can also say that the same thing is true of heroin and cocaine and alcohol. They are all less addictive than tobacco. And to say that since tobacco is addicting, why worry about cannabis is just complete nonsense. Because no one's going to say, let's legalize heroin and cocaine in the U.S. Or if they do, it's done under very controlled conditions. But the risk of cannabis is 9%, cocaine is about 15%, heroin 23%, and nicotine does lead the way at over 30%, meaning if you use nicotine, you can become addicted very quickly. And how about brain damage? There's a way of doing a study by looking at identical twins. One will use a drug and the other won't, and you see what happens to them. And this is called an identical twin study or a longitudinal twin study. They did a study in New Zealand that showed that if adolescents used cannabis, they had a drop of IQ between 6 and 8 points. Now that doesn't sound like much, but it is. That can really change your ability to function in life. And the other bad thing was they found that adolescents don't recover their IQ points. It's permanent. So that's a long-acting effect of cannabis. And those who started using cannabis as adults did not lose IQ points, and any IQ drop that was seen, they recovered as soon as they stopped, but not adolescents. And this is what's called a SPECT scan. It's a special form of a CAT scan. And it doesn't mean that you have holes in your brain. What it's looking at is blood flow in your brain. So if you look at the brain on the left, your frontal cortex, which is you, is pointing up, and that's a natural picture of blood flow in the brain or brain metabolism, and on the right is a picture of a daily cannabis user. It doesn't mean they have Swiss cheese holes in their brain. It means that the blood flow and the metabolism are no longer normal, and those can be permanent changes. All right, now there's also an argument that nothing goes wrong when you have a medical marijuana clinic. Kids don't start using marijuana. And this was a national study, and these are some heavy hitters. For example, Deborah Hassine, the lead author, she wrote the DSM-5 criteria for cannabis dependence. That's what psychiatrists and addictionists use to determine whether or not you're addicted. And they wanted to see if using or opening or legalizing medical marijuana had an effect on adolescent cannabis use. And their conclusion was no. But if you really tease apart the study, the lines on the left are states where kids use less cannabis after medical marijuana, and on the right are states that had more cannabis use after medical marijuana, and guess what the line is in the bottom right? Michigan. And they also made it into a logarithmic scale, so you couldn't tell how much the increase really was, but when we sat down with a calculator, Michigan had a 77% increase in adolescent cannabis use after the medical marijuanas were passed. And Michigan led, as you can see, Michigan led the country in that. So that's something else to be concerned about. And I have patients who are desperately ill with severe chronic pain who have medical marijuana cards. But who is your average medical marijuana card carrier? Okay? And this is a study from U of M looking at Michigan residents. The normal person or the normal card carrier, 96% were lifetime cannabis users. These are not people who were horribly injured, not people who got cancer and then started using cannabis for pain. They've already been using cannabis all their life. 73% were under 50 years old. And if you deal with chronic pain patients, you know they tend to be older. The overwhelming majority of these patients were under 50. 68% were abusing opioids. 35% were using cocaine, okay? This is not the typical chronic pain patient that I have in my practice. These are people who just use marijuana all their lives, and now they have a legal certificate for it. And in several states, opiate addiction is a qualifying condition to get a medical marijuana card. And the hope is that you'll start using marijuana and you won't use as much opioids. But that has never really been shown to happen. And anybody who knows Dr. Maroney up in Saginaw, he is adamantly opposed to medical marijuana cards. So to reward him, I took a blank medical marijuana card and photoshopped his picture on it. He was not appreciative, so. I have to warn you, though, that we've been talking mostly about retrospective studies, meaning that we didn't do an experiment, we didn't control who got the drug and who didn't get the drug. And the other warning is that association is not causation. For example, I can say that ice cream consumption leads to drowning deaths because when do you buy ice cream in the summer and when do you go swimming in the summer? So there's an association between ice cream and drowning, but ice cream does not cause drowning. So you have to be careful of that. So just very briefly, what do you watch for in your family members that may make you concerned about marijuana use? Changes in behaviors, impaired coordination, difficulty thinking, difficulty with memory, ongoing problems, dropping grades, obviously, flunking exams. You can have physical signs, bloodshot eyes. Cannabis, THC, dilates the vessels in your eyes, so you're bloodshot. You can have a constant cough. You can be tachycardic. I don't need to go into the munchies with cannabis. Everyone knows about that. And you have a dry mouth. So your family member may have all these presentations, and that makes you concerned about it. Anxiety, paranoia, memory, coordination, reaction time, they start doing poorly at sports, and loss of control. Things get worse and worse and worse. Loss of control is one of the 4 C's, which is a feature of addiction. So what do? I would love if, after giving a talk like that, we could say that we scared somebody straight. I am sure that most of the younger members of the audience know that I am lying through my teeth and that what I'm saying is not true and that they have evidence to support the opposite theory. You really can't scare somebody in most situations. The biggest program ever used in the country, called DARE, which is Drug Awareness Resistance Education, they used to spend about $750 million on this program, but it was never shown to make any difference. So education by itself doesn't help. And we don't have an effective medication for marijuana addiction. We have multiple medications for opioid dependence. We've got buprenorphine, methadone, naltrexone. We've got 2 or 3 medications for alcohol dependence, but we have no effective medication for cannabis. And simply incarcerating somebody, as you've already heard tonight, doesn't stop the behavior, because the behavior will simply begin again when they get out of prison. If you're talking about opioids, it's actually more dangerous when you get out of prison because your body is no longer used to the opioid. I had one patient who was incarcerated after having a child. They released her on Saturday night at midnight. I was supposed to see her on Monday morning. Her husband found her dead on Sunday at lunch. She didn't last more than a few hours. She made the call. She bought what she usually bought, and her body could no longer tolerate it, and it killed her. And younger patients are less likely to engage with somebody who's an addiction specialist, and I can tell you that happens over and over and over again. But there are things that are effective. Drug courts, which is what Judge Davis did. If you are a pilot, a lawyer, a physician, a nurse, or a pharmacist, we all have versions of voluntary drug courts, which are monitoring programs if you're found to be impaired. I'm the medical director of the Michigan Health Professional Recovery Program, and we monitor impaired doctors and nurses, and we have an 85% success rate. And drug courts have those same kind of success rates. And the most successful program that's advertised in the country, which is out in Hawaii for patients who have methamphetamine dependence, has the same success rate as we do for pilots and physicians. So you don't have to be a 747 pilot to be enrolled in these programs and have them worked. You're monitored closely. There's immediate repercussions if you have a relapse, and you spend your time staying clean rather than spend your time finishing off your sentence. You must be kept informed of the risks and benefits of cannabis. CBD has tremendous potential. CBD is not marijuana, okay? People use marijuana primarily for the THC effects. So when someone says, I'm using it for my health, the marijuana that you buy in the street has almost no CBD in it, and in fact, we believe that CBD counteracts THC, and a lot of strains of marijuana are developed to get away from the CBD. Support groups are invaluable. If you have a loved one who has addiction and is in trouble, you feel isolated. You don't want to talk about it. You need a support group. I believe Families Against Narcotics is a fantastic organization, and when I go to the meetings, I'm just amazed at people getting up and sharing their story about having someone who's in prison, having lost a loved one, having an active addict, or someone who just got into recovery. And you need to hear that because you need to know you're not alone. There's also the famous Al-Anon, which was developed primarily for alcohol and opioids. And there's something called Mar-Anon. I don't know if it's active here in this part of Michigan, but it's Al-Anon for families of those who are addicted to cannabis. And if you could have something that worked, I would hope that peer pressure would be used. Peer pressure means folks your own age in your school, folks like you, and not old guys like me standing up here giving lectures. Not many people are going to listen to that. But if your peers tell you that you're screwing yourself up, you may listen to that when you're not going to listen to anybody else. Oop. Okay, we're over. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Christensen, for sharing all of that wonderful in-depth information with us. It is now time for our main event. Well, I think actually Ken Daniels was our main event. This is our second main event. It's time for the movie Chasing Hope. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the film crew up there, the tech guys, to roll it. What a powerful movie, huh? With such an important message for young people and for parents alike. We are fortunate to have a couple of the people who appeared in the movie with us for our panel discussion, which is our last part of this program, as well as a number of other people. So we have, could we turn up the lights on the stage just a little bit so the people who are putting the chairs out here don't fall? Hello? There we go. So I'm going to, when our panelists get here, I'm going to introduce them to you, let them introduce themselves a little bit. I have a few sort of prepared questions, but I have a feeling that you all maybe have some questions of your own that you'd like to ask them as well. Okay, so you've already met the bookends on this panel that we have up here. Judge Davis to the far right, and or maybe your far left, and Dr. Christensen on the opposite side, but you haven't met any of the people in the middle. I'm not sure why this is doing that. But I want to invite maybe each of you to introduce yourselves to the audience and just say a few words. So do we want to start with Angela?
Sure. Hi, I'm Angela Spino-Bagoda. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and for me that means that I have over 6.5 years of continuous sobriety from drugs and alcohol. Thank you very much. I'm also a recovery coach and the community and school program coordinator for the Alliance of Coalitions for Healthy Communities. And I do work in prevention and recovery support services. And so what I do is a program called Keep Them Safe, Keep Them Healthy. And we go around to the schools and we use people in recovery as a way to communicate stories of through active addiction to recovery and explain some of the decisions that precede the addiction, how you get into addiction. And then we also educate students on the different forms of addiction. So we talk about marijuana, we talk about alcohol, we talk about opiate dependency, and I'm also doing a program right now called Resolve. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we get into the question part of that as well. So that's just a little bit about me. Thank you.
I'm Dawn Taylor. I am the executive director of Spring Green Educational Foundation, which is the organization that created this film. I'm also one of the producers, and most importantly, I am the mother of a son who is in addiction.
My name is Beth Robertson, and I'm the mother of 3 grown boys. My middle son's name was Jordan, as you saw in the film. He began experimenting with drugs when he was in high school, and I didn't realize how addictive drugs were. I just was very naive. And he struggled with addiction for well over 10 years. He did have one long period of sobriety where it was almost 3 years. I think it was about 2.5 years. He did go through quite a few rehab programs, but in March of 2016, he relapsed, and he was on his way to take he was a chemical engineering student at the University of Toledo, and unfortunately, like the movie showed, addicts or people who use drugs and become addicted to drugs a lot of times use it as a coping mechanism. And he was so anxious about his chemical engineering exam that he used right before it, and he did die in a parking lot, a Tireman parking lot, unfortunately. And the paramedics worked on him for over an hour. By the time I got to the hospital, they had been able to get a heartbeat back, but he was put on life support, and he was declared brain dead about 5 days later, and we had to make the decision to discontinue him from life support. Since then, I have started a grief support group in my community. Unfortunately, it has grown, and we had to start a second location already. One's in West Toledo, and one is in Oregon, Toledo, and it is truly a need because the grief from losing someone from addiction is definitely different. It's more complex. So that's my story. So I'm just here to share my story in hopes that it can help someone else.
Hi, my name is Christy Gervin. I'm a substance abuse counselor. Currently, I am formerly a high school social worker. I had 60 kids on my caseload at a Division I high school where we dealt with a lot of these same issues. My kids were the quote-unquote bad kids, but I'm here to tell you if they weren't yours, they were your neighbors, they were mine, they were everybody's kids. So what we're doing here today is really, really important.
Thank you. I'm going to start the questioning off with one question only, and then I may ask more if you all don't have questions, but I can't imagine that you don't. And my question is directed to Dawn. So Dawn, you're the producer of this amazing film, and so my question is, what sort of inspired and led you to produce this, and what's your hope for how this film will be used?
Well, my background is actually in education. I was a school counselor and a school dean, and I don't know, I'm hoping that everybody picked up that even though we do a lot of education on addiction, the reality is that I have never met an adolescent or adult, or anybody for that matter, who doesn't know that it's bad. But the truth is that everyone has a story. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to go beyond just the education part. We wanted to go into the heart. And we wanted to start asking, what's it like to be you every day? And what is it you're really dealing with? Because what we recognize is that ultimately, nobody wants to experience pain. And we live in a culture that tries to avoid it in any way possible. And so, and boy, being an adolescent today is unbelievably difficult. So we tried to create a film, which I think we did a pretty good job on, that covered everybody. I'm hoping that everybody could relate to at least one story in there and see themselves in it. And what is amazing to me, in all of the years that I've been in the field of education, that we focus so much on the test scores and our academics, which I'm not negating, it's incredibly important, and athletics, and we are not equipping anybody in the schools on how to deal with what's going on inside. And so if you recall Josie saying, I may be happy on the outside and I may be laughing, but inside, that's not how I feel. Every single day when I would walk down the halls of the schools, that's all you'd see are what the students would portray as their image. It's what they want us to see. And by the way, we as adults do that as well. And so we wanted to start the conversations of what's it like to be you. We've shown this film in schools all over. It was actually gifted for the state of Ohio The state of Ohio has mandated opioid prevention education K through 12. And so we gifted it for middle and high school students in the state of Ohio, along with the curriculum. We did not anticipate this, and we're really happy to happen. It is now in 39 states in the country because people just kept sharing it and sharing it. It's free to anybody. And what we would do is we'd go to some schools and we would just have little circles afterwards where we would say, what's it like to be you? I mean, really, if we really knew you, what would we know? And I can't tell you how many students shared in that moment their struggles with addiction or somebody in their family. We had one student who was actually suicidal and wrote us a letter that night. These are happening every day all over our schools, all over our country, and we're not asking that question. So that was really our motivation in this film.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'd like to open it up to the audience now. If any of you have any questions you'd like to direct to the panel at large or a particular member of our panel. I don't know, do we have any 3x5 cards that anybody's maybe written a question on?
Yeah. I was just wondering, why does the insurance company only cover 7 days of treatment and then they get released? You know, 7 days is not enough to recover. You know, I'm a recovering addict myself. I've been clean for 5 years.
Congratulations. That's fantastic.
I lost my son almost a year ago, but he was in treatments all over Brighton, I don't know how many times, but 7, 14 days. It's, you know, not enough, you know, and that's the part I don't understand.
I'll take a stab at it. Because we have a really broken system, and because we haven't viewed addiction as a disease for eons. Hopefully this epidemic is changing that. I do think that insurance companies are looking at this differently, but it's all about cost savings. You know, they have to see that longer term upfront would save them money at the end of it, and it's convincing insurance companies that they need to treat addiction like they do any other disease. And I will tell you that that's why each and every one of you are important to the process, because that will not happen until we get sick and tired of putting up with the way it is right now. I mean, we have to have a voice. And we only have a voice when good people get involved in bad things. So staying silent will just keep us where we're at. And it's why it's so important that grassroots organizations like ours have people like you that get involved with them, so that we have a voice that can change exactly the kind of brokenness that you're talking about.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that?
So addiction treatment is primarily based on treating withdrawal, inpatient treatment. And withdrawal is gone typically in the 7 to 14 days, and then you're on your way. And that's where things break down, because you wouldn't treat a diabetic like that, but that's how we treat addiction as an acute problem, and it's not.
Just to add on that too, what we are finding now, finally, is that, at least in the state of Michigan, they're starting to recognize that treatment is two-pronged. You have to have medicine-assisted treatment with opiates, and you have to have therapy. And as a clinician and a therapist, we don't get paid for it. I'm very fortunate to work at a clinic who basically he eats the cost of having the therapy because he knows it's important for success. However, you're not going to find a lot of places that will do that. We're starting to see finally that Medicaid and the state is finally agreeing that the only way to beat the opiate addiction is a two-pronged effort. So they're working to now cover the counseling aspect of it. So there's progress. It's very slow, but there's progress.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Oh, good evening, everyone. I wanted to commend the panel, and especially Your Honor, Ms. Linda Davis, for all of her hard work for the organization, and I work out in the community. I love working in the schools, and I think after viewing that film, which I thought was absolutely dynamic, that we need to do as community people, we need to filtrate the Board of Education meetings and parent-teacher meetings and bring about this information, especially in the middle schools and the high schools, and lift that stigma of drug education. Because certain communities, they frown on it when you approach the administration about marijuana or opioids. They just feel that there's a really bad reflection on the community. And I think by belonging to a group like this, that we can break the stigma, just like mental illness, that we can get into the schools as taxpayers and community members and bring about the awareness of the problems that we're having in our country. Not just our community, the whole United States of America. I think it's our duty, actually. Thank you.
I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that.
I can. I worked in the
Yes.
schools long enough, and believe me, when we started talking about vaping 5 years ago, nobody wanted to talk about it. And the reason parents don't, or the administration doesn't want to talk about these issues is because if you admit you have a problem in your district, then nobody wants to come to your school. And when you don't have taxpayers that want to send kids to your school, you don't get the funding. Districts are very, very, very underfunded. So if they have to, they're fighting for your students and your tax dollars. And if you admit you have an opiate problem, if you admit you have a vaping problem, well, that's a you problem, not a me problem. And I hear that all the time. My son goes to Royal Oak High School, and 3 years ago, I helped counsel 6 families who had children who had opiate addiction. Nobody wanted to believe it. The next year, the administration wouldn't even talk about it. I said, you had 6 kids that went to rehab last year, and you're not gonna talk about it? We have a problem.
Right. When we started Families Against Narcotics, we ran into that as well. We started in the basement of a church, and we started saying that we need to get young recovering people into the schools to talk, very much like this film did, because it's real people telling real stories, and we know that kids will listen to kids, but they're not going to listen to us. And our superintendent of the schools was there, and he did the right thing. He said, let's get it going. You know, you bring them in. Well, everybody dubbed Fraser High School as Heroin High, and their enrollment went down as a result of it because they were doing the right thing. I think this is getting to be a more popular topic now. I think schools are embracing it a little bit more, but they should be at the forefront in tackling this because it's young people that are getting addicted because of the strength of the drugs, and it's up to us to demand that they get involved, and that's what we want in our community is more education in our school systems.
So I think one thing that's really important too, and like working in the schools that I've seen is like when we go into the schools and we talk to the students, is making sure that we're actually like listening to what the young people have to say too. So when we go in and we have an opportunity to like sit down with a group of young people, that we actually ask them like the questions like, what do you think is going on here? Like, what is the issue that you guys think is most important? Is it mental health? Like, is it suicide? Is it opiates at your school? Is it vaping? Like, what do you guys want to focus on, and what are you invested in changing? You know, because each school I've noticed has its own personal issue. You know, maybe in this school district, it's vaping. And if we can focus on vaping there and they can make their own campaigns, then they're really bought into changing things. You know, so it's interesting when you go into the schools and you give them their own voice, then they're invested in changing things. But if you go in and you say, okay, this is what we're doing and this is what we're educating you on, then they're not as invested in changing things and they kind of tune you out. They're like, okay, well, we're, you know, so that's one of the cool things that we, you know, have come across in giving students and in them getting involved themselves. So. I think Livonia Save Our Youth Coalition did a really good job with that in their opioid project and kind of assigning the students in a way of them picking who the speakers were and assigning them the task of doing that as well. So that was a pretty cool project.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I had a question for Dr. Christensen.
Is there can someone get this young woman a mic?
Thank you. My question was, you mentioned that DARE wasn't real effective in the 80s. So how do you see the education you're doing today as different, better, and able to make the difference?
I think the stakes are a lot higher. That's all we can hope for. And that if we can get peers involved, like I mentioned, rather than just adults, that it may make a huge difference. But unfortunately, DARE was never really shown to make a dent, even though there was an enormous amount of work done.
It also was a one and done. They did DARE when you were very young, and then we never talked about it again after that. I don't think any educational program works if we're all just creatures of habit. You hear a message today and you walk away from it. Even in politics, I mean, they say you have to see somebody's name 7 times, 7 different ways before you remember it. As a politician, we use those to make sure that we develop campaign strategies so that people remember who we are. And we have to do the same thing in education. You can't go in 1 year and do great programs when kids are very little and impressionable and just think, well, we changed their behavior. It's got to be repetitive, and it has to happen more often.
And I just want to jump on that real quickly. I think that DARE is what we talked about, it's an education piece. That was it. It didn't get to the real root of the issue. It didn't have ongoing discussions. It didn't create a conversation, an ongoing conversation that dealt with the heart of the issue. Nobody really talked about that. And we still have a long way to go before we really get into every single one of those people in the film had something going on inside that they didn't talk about. And so it's not just education, it's getting that conversation going. And as you said, getting the ongoing support that's going to really create long-term change.
And I'd just like to add on to that too. One of the things that I consistently see now, I have a 16-year-old and a 26-year-old, and like I said, I was in the schools for 5 years, but parents don't want to believe it. I was at least buoyed by the fact that all these people showed up because they at least believe that it's a possibility. I'm telling you that your kids are vaping. And when I would call parents into my office and say they're vaping, they would say, it's not my kid. My kid doesn't vape. And then you'd show them the video with the smoke coming out of their mouth, and they're like, well, where did they get that from? Well, it's the thumb drive that you thought that was sitting on their dresser that's actually a vape. I was at the hairdresser last week telling that I was coming here today, and this woman behind me was like, well, if you were a stronger parent, that stuff wouldn't happen. I'm like, you're lucky there's scissors next to my head, honey, because I'm about to get up. I said, and then she later on wanted to know what a vape was. I'm like, oh, you're part of the problem. You have to acknowledge that your kid could be an athlete and a straight-A student, and your kid could be a genius, and your kid could be the quiet one in the corner, but they're all doing it. And until you acknowledge that it could be your kid, you're part of the problem.
Christy, I'm so glad that you brought that up because it's very important to understand how we can effectively reach and educate the young people, but I think it's also very important to reach and educate the parents. Not just because parents are necessarily resisting, although there are some, but you also have parents, and I don't know, maybe Beth can chime in with respect to this because I have personal experience with this, where you didn't know what the signs are. And it was too late and too long when ultimately I knew what was going on with my personal situation, and by that time the drug use, the addiction was very far along. Had I known and understood and recognized the symptoms earlier, maybe I could have learned a better way to intervene.
Okay, so I hate to admit this, but I did see a lot of signs, and I was ignorant in a different way, in the sense that I thought it was just normal teenage behavior, like Don and I went to high school together. I thought that he was just experimenting with, alcohol, and I had heard that he thought he had ADHD, and he had, experimented with Adderall in school, and I didn't realize, I was just stupid. I did not realize how strong the drugs were out there nowadays. I had no idea how addictive. I don't think anybody in the whole United States really understood how addictive opioids are. And he got into them right when they were being overprescribed and spilling out into the streets, and teenagers were getting them from their parents' medicine cabinets. I had a surgery when he was a junior in high school, and my entire bottle of pills was gone. He took my entire bottle. And I didn't think that that would cause him, addiction within 3 to 5 days, or, the withdrawals. I had no idea. And I know it sounds stupid to me now, even hearing myself, but at the time, I truly did not know. So yes, I did see signs, but what I didn't understand was I didn't understand addiction.
Right.
And one of the things that Beth and I just talked about when we were sitting together is that isolation is really, really big. And I thought I was being the cool parent because I gave my son the basement as his bedroom. Yeah. And I thought I was the coolest parent in the world because I know how much I wanted privacy. And she said she did the same thing.
I did the same thing, yeah.
And my son was hiding in the basement. That was part of the way he dealt with his addiction, was he isolated himself. And I just thought that was the coolest thing, that I was giving him that space. And now we recognize the significance of the connection that he needed, that we just didn't get.
Right. I think a lot of parents too, I know I did, is we're kind of in denial. We say there's only one person that's in more denial than the addict themselves, and that's the parents of the addict. Because it's painful to think that our kids might be addicted to something, and we see things and we almost make excuses for them. Well, yeah, they're losing weight, but she's dating someone, or this behavior is changing, but and when you find yourself doing that, and what I always like to tell parents is, you really know your kids. And when your gut tells you that something's not right, don't make an excuse for your gut, go with it. Because if I had followed my gut, I think I would have known a lot sooner what was going on in my own home. But it was the fear of it, I think, and it was also the denial that I just didn't want to believe it.
And I think, Judge Davis, that's the last word. We are... Yes, of course. If the rest of the audience doesn't mind going a minute over 9. Okay.
Well, actually, I want to speak to the rest of the audience from the standpoint that sometimes we look at our schools for doing this education, but we can do this in our churches, in our community centers, our libraries, the kids in the neighborhood. Everybody here is probably a parent, a child, a grandparent. I would like to know from Dawn how we can all watch this movie with those kids and have that conversation saying, if I really knew you, what would I know about you?
Yeah, the film is actually online. It's at chasinghope.org. So it's just the film's name.org, and you can download it. You can watch it for free. There's actually a discussion guide. So parents, we have had parents who've actually had the discussion guide and gone and had kids over in their living room with it. You're right, churches, community centers, it's very easy, chasinghope.org, and the foundation is happy to assist and support any organization or individual who wants to use this as a resource.
All right, I want to thank you all for coming, and a big round of applause for our presenters.
Testing.
And also for our sponsors. Again, thank you all very much.